So we're going to talk about risk management in projects. And I hope that by the end of this session, you'll know a little bit more about how to do risk management in projects, and not only to write the nice paragraph in a project proposal explaining how you're going to do risk management, but actually doing it in the projects. So really managing your risks. So the goal today is really to give you some concepts and definition about risk management, so that you understand why it's important to manage your risks on projects, define the different steps of risk management, understand how you can evaluate the risks, and understand how you can treat the risks on projects. So feel free to interrupt me anytime if you have any question. If it's getting really dark and you really want to have a peek at the eclipse, just tell me, we'll make a 5-minute break. I'm not sure this session will last for 3 hours. Depends whether you have some questions or whether you need to have more explanations. We'll see how it goes. I think we'll still make a short break at some point if I see that you are getting tired of me talking all that much. So we are not going to talk about risk management in banking industry, risk management in the creation of a tunnel. It's not about managing the risks overall in any company. It's not about credit risk or reputation risk. This is focused on managing the risk of a project. So first, let's discuss what is a project. So anybody could give me a definition of a project? Please, somebody. What? Just a few characteristics of projects.
Well, it's an activity with predefined objectives and limited time span.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure I missed a couple of criteria.
No, but basically it's you build a project because you cannot achieve the goal you want to achieve just by hoping that people in your organization are going to start working together, coming from, marketing, from finance, from here, from there, from that research part and this other research organization. So you organize a project so that all these people come together, work together, and achieve a goal. So the most important thing about project is that you want to achieve something that is not part of your daily operation of your organization. So being a research organization, mostly you are organized using projects. So you define projects so that people get together and work together to achieve that goal. And yes, a project is also defined by the fact that it has a starting date and an end date. It might be that the end date of your project is not the same, the actual end date is not the same as the one you had imagined starting the project, but that's another story. But the project is not there to last for 20 years or 50 years or forever. The project is supposed to be finished whenever you have achieved the goals that were set for that project. The project is also characterized by the fact that you are putting together people who might not be used to work together. There's a certain level of uncertainty. There's a certain level of innovation, because you are trying to build something that you have never built this way before. So this objective you try to reach, it's something new. Maybe it's really close to something you did before. Maybe it's really close to, or you have a good idea of how you're going to build that solution, but still it's something new. It's never been done exactly the same way. So that level of uncertainty, that level of innovation will bring another characteristic of project, which is a certain level of risks. Compared to your usual daily day-to-day operations that you can have in an organization, for example, HR process or HR activities, it's something that will last forever. As long as the company is there, you will have HR activities. They will pay the salaries, they will hire people, they will do some annual evaluation. And these activities, they are well known, they are not that risky, they know how to do it. You have people who are specialists in that domain to do these activities, and so it's not that risky. You won't say my organization is at risk because of our HR activities, because this is managed and the level of risk is low. If you create a new project, a new research project, or a project to create a new product, then you get people who might not be familiar with this new product, with this new situation. There might be some new technologies you are going to use that you don't master. So the level of risk of that project, you don't know exactly the steps that you are going to implement to create that new solution. So the level of risk in that project is bigger, higher than your usual HR activities. Okay, so a project is unique, it's specific, it's one solution, one thing that you want to put in place, and most of the time you have to have these people coming from different parts of the organization. So managing a project, it's like jungling with different balls, and anytime you jungle, you have to keep all these balls in the air, and anytime you need to go that way trying to catch that ball that is not going or is going out of its normal path, then maybe trying to reach that one, then you're going to drop another one. So project management is about making sure that you keep all your balls close together, managing the scope of the project, managing the time of the project, managing the cost of the project. And one aspect that is not always obvious when managing a project is also managing the quality of the project. So sometimes people talk in the literature, people talk about the triangle of project management, and you have the scope of the project, what you're going to do. You have the time of the project, how long it's going to take to do it, and the cost, how much it's going to cost to do it. And quality is not shown. I like that diagram because it also shows quality. On any project, if you don't manage the time correctly, the cost correctly, or your scope correctly, what happens is that it's the quality that will get lower. The level of quality will get lower. So anytime on any project, doing project management, it's really, if I cannot spend more time on that project, and if I cannot add more resources on that project, meaning I can't play on the time, I can't play on the cost, either I need to reduce my scope, so I need to decrease the amount of items I'm going to build, or I will play on the quality. So I will keep the same scope, so producing the same result with the same amount of time, with the same amount of money, then it's the quality that will get lower. So working on project management is trying to keep all these items aligned and understanding at first, when I define my project, I need to understand, okay, what is it that I want to build? What is my scope? And defining that precisely. How long will that take to build it? So defining the planning and the timing for the project. How much will that cost? And so defining all the resources that I need and the related costs. And what is the level of quality that I want to reach? So at first, when you define a project, you define all these items. And risk management is understanding that the way the project is going to get implemented and is going to happen might not be exactly what you had expected. And so one of these items might change during the course of the project. And risk management is about trying to understand which part you might have not been that great in defining them at the beginning, or which part you think there are some possibilities that something is not going right, something is going wrong, and you would have negative impact. So risk management is about understanding where there are some risks that what you had planned at the beginning is not going to happen exactly that way. And so you'll have to manage incidents, things that are not exactly as planned. Okay? So yeah, that's what I just explained. So when you are in a project mode, so away from the business as usual activities, you have some uncertainty, you have some complexity that you need to manage. And so trying to define the project at the beginning as with many details as possible will help you manage that scope and all the items of the project. But then, so you try to put some predictability, so defining exactly all the specification of your project, defining all the resources that you would need in the little details, so that you have all the items there. So you try to put some predictability, but then you know that everything will not go as planned. So risk management is putting on top of that estimation that you do at the beginning of the project, is putting some activities that will manage that unpredictability. So it's trying to put some more predictability in the uncertainty that you have in your project. Yeah, so risk management is a discipline that is well known, that has been there for many years, that is quite mature. So you have project management methods, many of them, and all of them propose some risk management activities. And even if from one method to the other you might not have exactly the same names, and maybe one has 4 steps and the other has 5 steps, most of the time the concepts behind are the same. It's just a question of how you name things, or in the exact order in which you do things. But it's quite a subject that is stable and mature. I saw you take picture. I will provide you the slides as a PDF after the training. I will send it to you, and you can share that. And as you've seen, I'm filmed. So you might also have access to the video after that. Okay, so let's go into the subject of risk management and see how it goes. So just a quick example. You're going by car from Luxembourg to Brussels because you have to sign a contract with a big client, let's say. And so you're driving. You know that motorway, there are some holes, it's not that great, and so you're driving at 120 kilometers. You are respecting the speed limits, and suddenly there's a big storm on the road. So huge storm, lots of rain, it gets slippery. So what you do is you slow down to 80 kilometers per hour, and then the storm, it was really brutal, but then quick. So the storm goes away, and the road starts to dry. So the sun comes out, and so you start driving faster. You go to 110 kilometers, and then after some time, the road is really dry, and then you go back to 120 kilometers. This is risk management. You've done all the steps of risk management activities. First, there was some identification. What you realize is that there's a risk of aquaplaning, a risk that your car will slip on the road. with some consequences that you could. There are some trees at the side of the road, so you could your car could go in one of these trees. You could get injured. You could crash your car. You could also bump into other cars. You could hurt other people. You could die. You could also kill other people, or you could just crash their cars. So many consequences. So impact is really losing control and having one of these types of accidents. Okay, there was some assessment during that that travel you made. So you realize there is, with that storm and with all that rain everywhere, with the road that is really slippery, and the fact you know that your tires are not really recent and then might not be that good on wet road, you realize that there is a high probability that you're going to slip if you don't reduce your speed. And you realize also that if you have an accident at that speed, there's a high impact, crashing the car and so on, getting injured. So you did some mitigation action. So one preventive action was to reduce your speed, so that even if you have an accident, if your speed is lower, then the impact of the accident will be lower than if your speed is higher. And you also reduce the possibility of having an accident by having a lower speed. And then you did some monitoring. So along the way, along the travel, you realized that the storm was gone, that the road was getting better, and so you increased your speed up to the normal speed when everything was back in normal conditions. And then in that case, there was no capitalization step in your risk management activities, but there would be one. So if you had an accident, if you had injured yourself or crashed your car, you're pretty sure that next time you're in the same condition, you will reduce your speed and you will make sure that you don't slip on the road. So capitalization is about if the risk occurs and if you learn something about that situation and you try to do better next time. Okay? So what is a risk exactly? Let's look at some definition. So a risk on a project, it's mostly the fact that you are not going to achieve the objective of the project. So it's something bad that will happen, or something that will happen that will have bad consequences on the way the project is organized, so that the consequence is your goals are not achieved. So that's the main definition of a risk on a project. So we have one characteristic is the fact that a risk it's uncertain. It's not something that is already there. It's something that could happen. So it's an uncertain event, and it's also it could occur, and it will have some impact on your project, on the achievement of your objectives. And so if we talk about risk management in general, we can also assume that risk management can take care of risks. So there are threats that are negative to your project, but also you could consider that risk management is about taking care of positive items that could occur on your project that will have a good impact on your project. And then we talk about opportunities. So overall, we could imagine that risk management should take care of threats, but also of opportunities. Today we're mostly going to talk about risks in a negative way as opportunities. You always find a way to work on opportunities on the project when you find some. Okay, so risk, or what is not a risk? So as we said, risk is an uncertain event that might happen in the future that will have a negative impact on your project. So this means that an event that is certain, that is there, it's not a risk, it's a problem that you need to work on, that you need to find a solution to. But it's not any more risk management, it's something else. It's project management, it's incident management, taking care of the problems that you have currently on your project. That's one thing. If the event has happened in the past, it has already occurred in the past, you want to learn some lessons from that experience. And so it's lesson learned. It's another subject in project management, but it's not it's not risk management. And so we do agree that a risk is something that is uncertain, that might happen in the future, and so it will help you, or you will have to put in place some actions, some proactive actions to take care of the risks. And what we need also is a negative impact. So something that might happen in the future that has no impact whatsoever on the project and its objective, you don't care. You don't need to manage that. Risk management, really, you need to remember one thing is that you should have some balancing between the amount of time and money you're going to put into risk management and what you would gain from these activities. Risk management, it's all about having that balance and having some added value to all these risk management activities. As this is something that is not certain, it's always a question of is this really necessary to put all these efforts into finding some mitigation actions if I'm not sure that this event will occur, or if I'm not sure about the impact that it will have on my project? So finding the right balance is all. This is about risk management activities. So you can never say my risk management is fully done. I've done everything up to 100%. There's always one risk you have not thought about that is not part of your risk management. So it can never be fully, and so it's just a question of finding the right level of activities that you want to put in place. And so the goal is absolutely not to take care of all the risks that you could have on your project. So having, as we are located in Kirchberg, having a plane dropped on your building, it's a risk on your project. So doing the list of risk at the beginning of your project, you could have that list. And a big flu epidemic that will kill all the people in your team, it's also one risk that you can list. You can imagine these many risks on your project. So it's never about trying to avoid all these risks, because you can always find another one that you had not thought about, and it's always a question of which ones are the ones that are important to treat, which ones are the ones that I'm aware of, I will try to follow up on them, but that's it. And which are the ones that I really want to do something about because they are so important and I'm so sure that they will happen sometime. Yeah.
Shouldn't we consider only risks which emerge from the project activity? I mean, a plane crashing, yes, it's a risk, but it's got nothing to do with our project. So when I conduct a project in whatever research development, so it's usually, I would think that only the actions that we are doing, the resources we need are, if I need a resource, I have to think about that resource. Somebody, a skilled person, or might not be available or whatever. I mean, the plane could crash on anybody's head, so it's completely out of scope for me.
Yeah, sure. So at the beginning, and we'll go through the different steps that you take to do risk management, but at the beginning you want to open your mind and say, what could go wrong on my project? And so try to imagine, and you could go up to a point where you start having funny ideas about plane crashing and this and that, and I don't know, the university will go bankrupt and there's no more universities in 3 months. So you could go that far because at first in risk management you're asked to identify all the potential events that could have an impact on your project. So you could go that far, but then what you do is you try to drill down to focus more on the risks that are really important to treat on your project. And of course, as there are many activities that you have to do preparing your project, and you will spend a little time on risk management. Most of the time you're not going to spend these many hours just inventing funny risks. Just to decide the next hour that no, this is too funny, I'm not going to treat that, or I can't do anything about a plane crashing. So maybe I can identify that risk, but the next step is to say I can't do anything about that. So, well, what's the point? Okay, so risk management, just to summarize the definition, it's all the activities that you are going to put in place and that are coordinated so that so that you identify the risk, you assess them, you define some mitigation actions, you follow up on these actions, you follow up also on the risk and their assessment, because along the way the project will evolve, and so the risks and their level of probability and level of impact might also evolve. And at the end also capitalizing on all these activities along the project and at the end of the project, so that your risk management activities get better for the next project maybe. So these are all the activities you do within risk management. So again, it's not about avoiding all dangers, it's just about putting the right amount of resources, time and money, just focusing on the risks that are important in that context for that particular project. Okay, so some additional definition. So we can talk about the risk exposure of a project. So risk exposure is, so we're going to see other definitions, but mostly what you have about a risk is the probability that that risk occurs. So it's, for example, 10% of probability that I slip on the road if I keep on driving so fast, and the impact that it will cost me if the risk actually occurs. So 1,000 euros. So for that risk, the exposure, it's the multiplication of the probability and the impact. So for that risk, I have $100 exposure. On a project, I can list the different risks that I have. I can compute the probability and the impact for all of them. Yeah.
But it's well known that probabilities are very difficult, so it makes no sense for me, for instance, to evaluate probabilities for my small project. It's the trickiest part.
Yeah, I'm just telling you the definitions at that point and the concepts. And later on we'll see actually what you do on projects. And most of the time you are not going to try to assess. I'm not using a risk exposure on my project, because it's just, I could invent 10% or 23% or 34% of probability, but it will just be guessing out of without any actual facts. So most of the time what you stick to is you don't compute that, and you stick to, is that risk with a high probability, a medium probability, or low probability, or something like that. We'll see later on what more practical way of implementing that. There we are still at defining and giving you some standard definition of risk management. So. And there are some businesses where they are doing this in banking industry for credit risks, or in other domains at the NASA, and there are many domains where they need to have actual figures, actual amounts of money related to the different risks. But For management of research projects, it's not really necessary most of the time. So what you do is you have the list of all your risks on a project. You try to compute the exposure for each of that risk, and then you sum all the exposures. And so you have the amount of money that will represent the exposure of that entire project. Okay? So if we summarize on the different notions. So the notion of impact, yep.
And I hate to interrupt, but that will not wait. If we want to see it, it's about now.
Okay, then if you all agree, we can take a 5-minute break.
Guys, for those who did not sign in, if you can please sign in, especially if you need the slides.
Everybody's back. Okay, so let's go back to risk management. So a few notions, we'll talk about them, but then again, it might be not all of them that you're going actually to use on your projects, but let's just be general in the first definitions I give you. So impact we've talked about. So it's really the level of consequences that you have if the risk occurs. Probability is the degree of probability of that risk happening. Detectability is a notion that is even harder to evaluate. It's the percentage of, or the percentage of ability to detect that the risk is there. So let's take an example. The flu. So if I am sick, I'm coughing. If I have the flu, there's a big chance that you will get also the flu, because we've spent 3 hours in this room together. If we will not know that I have the flu for maybe it's 2 weeks of incubation period. So I might be already having the virus. Is it a virus? Yeah, having the virus, but we don't know that. So I could give you the flu virus, and there's no way we can detect that the risk is there. But if we imagine that the flu virus was coming with big blue spots all over your face whenever you already have that virus, then that risk would be far more detectable than the actual flu virus. So in that case, you would know that you have that virus, the risk is there that you will catch that virus, and so you will not agree to spend some time with me, and you will tell, go back home, get better, and come back in 3 weeks when you are healthy. So this notion of detectability. There are some risks that are more detectable than others, and so this one will have less consequences because you will know really quick that the risk has occurred. Whereas for other risks, you will not know that the risk is already there, that the event is there, and that the consequences are starting to add up. So detectability is one notion, and then so you can try to estimate the criticability of a risk by mixing the impact probability and detectability. So multiplying them together to have one summarized assessment of a risk. Okay, there's another notion that is also not always applicable, not always important, and certainly not always easy to assess. It's the notion of proximity. There's one thing to say, along the life of my project, there is a 50% chance that this will happen. So this is probability. But then the notion of proximity is saying, okay, over my 10-month project, the risk that this will happen is it will happen more in the next 3 months, or in the last month of the project, or in the middle of the project. So trying to identify when that risk is likely to happen. So that's the notion of proximity. And so you can try to assess your risk using all these notions, but we'll see that in practice you don't use all of them. We said that risk has some negative consequences on your project. So what are these consequences? So it might be that there is something that will happen that will have an impact on the partnerships you have on your projects, on the relationships that you have. It could have an impact on the financial situation of your organization or of the project. It could be linked to the reputation at the end of your team, of your project, of your organization. Some question of profitability. So if a risk has some impact on the cost of the project, at the end it's less profitable and it's less efficient than it was supposed to be. It could be also efficiency we talked about. Your competitive positioning towards your different competitors might be impacted by some risk. So reputation, image. In some cases, there are some risks that could put in danger the entire organization, really its future. I hope that the way you are organized, one single research project could not put in danger the entire organization. Otherwise, you don't choose your research project wisely. If you have one project that is that big and that important that if there was some problem on that project, the entire SnT would be put in danger. In some organization, the risks could have some consequences on your market share. And also on your ability to, if we're talking more in general, your ability to manage your organization. Some risks might have some consequences on that. So these were more general impacts. So we've talked about the exposure level of risk on one project. The idea is that if you have whatever the names, and these are in French, sorry, but it's just if you have different steps, different phases in your project, usually what happens is you have a higher exposure of towards risk at the beginning of the project, and along the way it will go down, and by the end of the project, the risk that something would go wrong and will prevent you from reaching the objective is far lower, of course. And the idea on that diagram is to show you that if you don't do anything, you will have that kind of diagram, or that kind of curve. If you do some risk management, what you try to do is at every step, at every phase, you try to analyze the situation, take some actions, assess your risks, so that overall your exposure is always a little bit lower, or sometimes even a lot lower than the natural, without doing anything, exposure you would have. Okay, so this is to show you that normally if you do some risk management correctly, you would have a lower exposure. So at the end, we'll see, at the end, the cost of the project is better managed, and the budget of the project is better managed. So let's have a look at that. So the idea is, if you don't do anything about risk management, you would do an estimation of the cost of your project. So it might be a little bit too optimistic, because you haven't thought about risks, you haven't thought about anything that could go wrong. So you have an initial estimation of the cost. So what you will do is you will define your budget, and you might have in mind that everything is not going as planned, so your budget is a little bit more than your estimation. What will happen is that life will happen. You will have some things that will not go right, and these we call incidents. So when a risk is actually there, it's an incident. So this will cost your project. So on top of the budget you had imagined, there will be some extra costs because that person is ill. You still have to pay that person, but then you need to hire another replacement person, or I don't know, you have to buy new machines because that one has broken down or whatever. So you have extra costs. And so the real cost of the project is that estimation plus the extra cost. So that's when you don't do any risk management. With risk management, what you try to do is, okay, so you have your initial estimation, it's the same. And then all the possible risks that you try to identify, and you try to estimate how much they could cost. So the impact of these risks. And then what you will do is, with risk management, you will try to put in place some actions. And these actions will have some effect that the total amount of possible risk will be reduced. So the idea is to do some actions so that the total amount of risk happening on your project is less. Either less impact on some risk or less risk. So some risk that you avoid totally, that will not happen. So your possible risk is that there are some risks that will still occur, of course. There are some that you had not envisioned as risks that will come along the way. So you have some extra incidents that you did not envision. So your minimum budget would be the same as in the other situation. Having that, plus you have to pay for these actions. It costs something. Whenever you do something, it costs something. It's time that people from the team are spending on doing some actions mitigating the risk. They are not spending them on the project, so it costs something. At the end, your likely budget is, there are some risks that will occur, so your budget will be between there and there. And totally, your potential budget is really everything plus all the risks that we had envisioned. Okay, so by doing this analysis, what you're better on the estimation of your budget, and you're better in the estimation of the action budget. So dedicating part of your project budget to actions to reduce the risks, and you're better at the end in the overall estimation of your entire budget for the project. So at the end you have less surprises in the comparison of your actual costs compared to the budget you had. Yeah, so your real cost is still everything that you had envisioned, plus the cost of the actions, plus the cost of the risks that have actually occurred, plus the cost of the incidents that you had not planned and you had not imagined. Okay, so what's the benefits of doing some risk management activities on your project? So first, you have an idea of the risk that could happen. It will, doing some risk activities and risk management activities in the organization in general will help increase the culture towards on risk management. And so if you're doing that alone on your project, really alone, it's one thing. You might have difficulties. If you're the only project and the only project manager, talking about risk in an organization where all the others do not talk about risk, then you will be, the one that is always thinking pessimistic and bringing bad news and so on. So you need to be able, and that's, maybe you cannot change that personally, but the organization needs to create a culture where you can talk about risk, where you can show that there are some risks, when you can spend some time and money managing risks. Otherwise, it's quite difficult to know that these things will happen, but you can't talk about them. You can't have an extra part of the budget to do something about them. Then if you're on your own, it's quite difficult. If there is that culture about risk in the organization, then it has to be at that level that risk are managed. So risk management is really about being able to do some clear reporting on the situation of the project, explaining this is where we are, this is what we want to do, and these are the risks that we have along the way, and this is what we intend to do to try to avoid this risk. On a project, you should always be able to do that. So during your steering committees, at any regular point of time in your project, being able to say, this is where we are, this is where we go, and these are the troubles that could come in the way. And so, again, always imagine that risk management, you can spend all your time and money on the project trying to avoid risk and not doing anything on the project. But that's not what you want to do. So you have to find the right amount of time and money you want to invest on the risk management instead of investing them on actual work and actually reaching the objectives. So it's always a question of what the risk would cost you if they occur against what the action will cost you if you put them in place to avoid the risks. Of course, there are some critics against risk management activities. It has a cost, for sure. You're doing something, so it will cost something. It has some, you have to do some lists, and you have to do some documents, and you have to do some reports, so there is some administrative burden. You might have troubles. You cannot do risk management because you don't have anybody understanding what is risk management. You don't have risk managers. You don't have enough resources just to do the job on the project, so you cannot spend these resources doing risk management. You don't have the competencies to. You don't have anybody who could do that. Talking about risk is really could be considered. People criticizing the risk management could tell you it will just prevent us from making decisions. So if we talk about everything that can go bad and this can go and that could happen and this and that, it will just clog the brains of the one who need to make decisions. They don't need to know all these. They are just probabilities. They just need to know the current situation and make the decision based on that current situation, on fact, actual fact and figures. They don't need to know that this could happen with these consequences that would have this impact and so on. Some people could argue that. And so also risk management, it's all about, trying to put some predictability and trying to imagine what could go wrong, what could happen, and what would be in that case. And so just thinking about all these probabilities will also prevent you from being reactive, being just, doing things instead of thinking and brainstorming. And so people that are against risk management activities will tend to tell you this. Of course, the truth is in the middle, trying to have a little amount of risk management, particularly when you define your projects. so that you start on a good basis and regularly during the project. It's the right amount, and it can be small amount of risk management, but just taking a step back from your activities on your project, and sometime during the project regularly thinking, okay, are there some big risks? Should I tell somebody about that probability that the entire team is not competent enough to do this? Will it be beneficial to my project that we talk a little bit about the thing that could go wrong, so that everybody is not surprised in 3 months where we have not achieved the results we were supposed to achieve. Okay, so let's talk about risk management activities in more detail. So, as we've said with the example of the travel to Brussels, you have a first step about risk identification, so defining the different risks. Then you have risk assessment, where you measure the probability and impact of your risks. Then you have the risk mitigation, where you try to find solution. You implement this solution and you monitor them in the risk monitoring step. And then you have some knowledge capitalization, trying to learn from the experience about risk management during that project and trying to get better next time. So if we talk about the life cycle of a project, and basically any project will go through a project definition phase, a design phase, so thinking about how we are going to develop that solution, a development phase where you develop the actual solution, and a deployment phase where you put in place that solution. So if we think about these 4 phases, what will happen as far as risk management is concerned? You would have identification, assessment, and mitigation actions would happen a lot during the project definition phase. And then you might have at that step a document that's called risk management strategy, or part of your project proposal where you define how you intend to manage the risks. So that's one step. Then during the project, what you have is mostly monitoring. So from the list you had defined in the project proposal, you will check whether these risks are still there, whether the probability or impact have changed, whether the actions that you had identified are efficient, and so on. And of course, in the middle, as the situation evolves, you might have some new identification, new assessment, and new mitigation steps, so that you identify new risks and assess them and try to find mitigation actions. So this is during the design and development phases, a little bit during the deployment phase by the end of the project. And there what you have mostly, the only thing you really need is a list of risks with a few characteristics and a list of actions related to this risk. So what we call, or you can call it whatever, but in some cases it's called the risk register, or the risk list, or the risk catalog. The name is not important, as long as you have one place. It can be a separate document, it can be part of your project manual, of your project charter, of your project, whatever you call the document where you define the definition of your project. And then by the end of a project, you might want to spend some time on the capitalization activities, and there you might have some project closure report, some feedback, whatever you call it again, a document that will say, this is the thing we've done during that project, comparing your budgets and your estimation against the actual figures, and trying to gather some lessons learned. And there in that document, it's a good practice to have one piece, one paragraph, one page, to think about risk, were there some risks that I did not identify that occurred during my project? Have I been efficient in the way I have implemented some mitigation actions? Anything that you can learn from what you did regarding risk management during the project could be done there at that time. Okay, so let's go through the different steps. So identification. So what you have during that phase is you have the context of your project, you have your organization, you have your partners, you have some constraints that are coming from the domain in which you're going to do your project. All these sources of information will help you identify a list of a list of risks. So at the end of that step, you have identified risks. The objective of that phase is really to find the most exhaustive list of risks. Again, do you want to go as far as the plane crashing on the building kind of risk? But what are the main risks that could threaten the goals of your project? And try to find the causes of these risks. Try to define the risk with as many details as possible. Try to explain the consequences, the impact of this risk, and try to do some classification, categorization. There are risks related to the technical domain of that project. There are risks that are more related to partnership and the different relationships we have with the different actors on the project, and risks that are more related to the team or to the whatever. So trying to identify some categories. So that's one step. How do you do that? Well, the answer is most of the time you need to think. You need to brainstorm. You need to ask the right persons. You need to ask persons who have some experience in that domain. You need to go back to some past projects that could be quite close to your current project. You could go to some checklists that will help you, think a little bit out of the box, out of that project. Imagine if it's the first time you did that kind of project with that kind of funding partner, financing partner, then there might be some risks that you are not aware of. So going back to people who know, who have some experience, it's the best. It's the best approach. There might be some standards that you can use. So if in a particular domain, in a particular technology, there are some best practices in the domain, and if you do not follow these best practices, there is a risk that something goes wrong. So looking at the different frameworks that you can have and put in place in that particular domain for that particular project, you could imagine, if we do not do that this way, then there might be a risk. So this could be a source for identifying risks. The 5 whys is trying to understand, asking some people, why do you think this project could go wrong? And why do you think it could go wrong in that case? And why would be the source? And 5 times you will ask the question, so that you go down to the root cause of that situation. That was the first statement you said, asking the first why. And so you try to treat that root cause instead of treating just the symptom that you have. The what if technique. What if we don't have that material in time? What if this does not go right? What if so? Just taking all the items that you have in your planning, all the items, all the resources that you have, all the items, all the elements that you have defined in a project, looking at them with a risk eye and say, what if this is not working as planned? What if we were totally wrong in the estimation of the cost of that machine we need to use? What if this and that? And so trying to find, identify some risks. If you have some documentation, again, it's really taking the different sources of information on your project and stop looking at them in your planning role, in your coordinating role, in your I need to work with my partners role, but looking at them just with the risk manager role. Looking at them saying, what could go wrong? What would be the impact if that thing is not ready in time, if that person is not available for my project? So looking at discussing with experts, brainstorming. Yeah, if you have the chance of working in an organization where risk management is a topic you can talk about, is a topic that is worked on, and you can have some knowledge databases on risks, checklist of risks. If you can go back to past project, have a look at that final project document, final report on your project, and if there is a paragraph listing the risk, you can use that as a source to try to identify new risks. If you have a PMO, so a project management office in your organization, and they gather some risk feedback on the project, it's also a good way of discussing them with them at the beginning of the project, having done maybe some of these activities, but going back to that team, and they could tell you, okay, you've thought about all these topics, but maybe you should look also into this domain, because we know that past project where we had some troubles with, I don't know, supplier relationships. Maybe you need to look and see whether you're really clear about all your suppliers. And auditing. So audit reports can be, auditors are really good at finding sources for risks. So it can be also a good thing in some context. If you have some audit reports, you can always go back to them and imagine some risks. Yeah, so if we want to think about a few categories of risks that you can think about, so we've talked already about technology. So is the technology we're going to use a source of risk? The size of the project, the complexity of the project, the competencies that I need, the expertise that I need, the experience that I need. Are there some items in my context, in my organization, that could be sources of risk? Some external conditions, partners, and again, think about partners who work on the project, partners who, so all the stakeholders, so my suppliers, my clients, the people, the final users of the solution. So think about all this. So this could be a few categories you can think about at first when you try to identify the risk. So the results of the identification, it's a list of risks, as we've said, and for each of them you could have a name, a description of the cause of that risk, the impact of that risk. You can try to have some classification, nature, categories of the risks. Somebody who is responsible for that risk. So that could be somebody who is just responsible for, from time to time, checking whether that risk has occurred or not, and following up on the risk. And it could be also the same person who will be responsible for the mitigation actions, but it could be somebody else. We'll see that later. And a status, you could have a list of risks, and at some point of time, the risk is not there anymore on the project. So you can have a risk that is closed. It's not going to happen. It has not happened, and it's final. Or a status that says it was a risk, now it's a problem. It has actually occurred, and we need to treat that as an actual problem on the project. So, sorry. So this is an example of a document. So, risk management is not about tools. If you tell me I cannot do risk management because I don't have the right tools, I don't believe you. It's not a question of tool. It's just a question of thinking about the project with the right mind. Tool with an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, you can do risk management. It's not a question of tool. So an Excel spreadsheet could look that way. So you have the description of the risk. When it was identified, you can even imagine to identify the method that you use to identify that risk. The phase of the project where that risk could occur. In some cases, it's interesting to know that it's a problem about that risk. So a simple table is enough as far as tool is concerned. So when do you identify risks? So during the project proposal, of course, you need to do some thinking about risk at that time. Of course, there are some risks that are visible at that time, and there are some risks that will come later on. Because you might not know when you do the project proposal, maybe all the resources that will actually work on that project. So the fact that that person is not available enough because they are already busy with 10 other projects, you might just discover really when the actual team is put together. But at project proposal, there are still lots of risks that you can identify. So at project start, it might be that your proposal, you're doing it for core proposals now, and then the project, you have the agreement for your core funding, and then the project actually starts in 6 months or even in a year. So the situation might not be exactly the same, or you had imagined during the proposal that you were going to be organized this way with these people. People have left or whatever. So when the project actually starts, you need to go back to that list of risks and see if it's still accurate, and you need to update the list with new risk, new actions. And as I said, regularly during the project, you need to take a step back, looking at the project with a risk perspective. And so if you have regular steering committees, it's a good timing and a good point where you can think about risks. If you have some reporting, some points where you need to have a status, regular status on your project, it's always a good practice to have some part about risk on top of the general, what are the deliverables, what is the timing, what are the costs. And of course, as we said, at project closure, it's really a good thing to think back about how you do your risk management. And do you still have some risks that are there that you need to treat, even if the project is closing and your project organization is gone? You pass over your solution to some permanent team, and they need to be aware of some risk, maybe. So you need to identify this risk and identify some people responsible for this. Okay, second step, and then we'll have a break. The assessment phase. You have identified some risks, and after that assessment phase, you want to have that list of risks that is with an assessment and with priorities within the list. So the objective here is really to produce some information, some more detailed information about these risks, so that some people can make a decision whether we want to implement some actions to reduce this risk, or whether it's acceptable to, be aware of this risk, but that's it. We're not going to do anything further. So what you want to do in that step is rank the risks according to their criticality, to their probability, to their impact. And at the end, you want to be able to say, these are the risks we want to focus on. These are the risks we're going to just monitor and follow, but we're not going to do anything about them. So that at the end, you are able to, again, balancing the amount of time you spend on risk management and the actual efficiency of these actions. So focusing on the actions that are necessary, that is to say the ones that are on the risks that are the most important. The whole question is, what is the most important risk? So as I said, we have different notions. We've seen proximity, detectability, and so on, but most of the time we stick to probability and impact. And for each of them, for each risk, you want to assess the level of probability and the level of impact. And we'll see in the next slide how you do that. But okay, so you have a level of impact, high, medium, low, 1, 2, 3, 4. For probability, you could go for percentages. There's a 55% chance that this will occur. And what you can do is, if you have some, of course, if you're using high level, high, medium, low, multiplying I with I, that would end up with an I, but multiplying a low with an I, would that be a medium? Not sure. So it does not work with all the scales you might use. But if you have some numbers, you could do 1 multiplied by 4 equals 4. But then 4 multiplied by 1 equals also 4. So if I have a low probability and a huge impact, is that risk that important as the one that has a high probability but a low impact? Not sure. So sometimes trying to rank your risks, you don't need to try to have one figure, one measure that will help you ranking the risks. You just need to define the probability and the impact, and then use a matrix to try to position the risks and to see the ones that are the most important. Because that will, you lose some information doing that. So what you can do is, so if we look at the different scales, for probability, you can have some percentages, you can have some high, medium, low, and some, I like the 4-point scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, because there's no middle. And it's always so easy to go for the middle value, because then you don't have to decide. So 1, 2, 3, 4, you have to pick whether it is a little bit more important or a little bit less important. There's no medium value. For impact, you can have some categories of amounts in euros if you are able to do that. If we don't have that resource on the project, we assume that, and if we have a trainee doing the job, we assume that it will cost that amount. And so we consider that if that risk is between €0 and, 5,000, then it's the first category. If it's between 5,001 and 10,000, then it's the second category. So try to identify categories of amounts. Again, high, medium, low can work also, 4-point scale or whatever scale you want to use. And there it's just a question of being consistent. So if you can go to your organization and they tell you which kind of scale you have to use. I don't know if there are some funding organization that will impose some skills for risk management, or if you really you can decide and it's up to you. But it's always a good thing to be a little bit consistent in the way you do it within an organization. If you, for impact, you can either measure an overall impact of that risk for that project. So saying that risk has a high impact, so it's 4. Or that other risk has a low impact, so it's only 1. Or you can do something far more detailed, try to imagine, okay, what is the level of impact of that risk related to costs? What is the level related to time? What is the level related to quality, performance results, and so on and so on? And so there are some methods where you define different criteria regarding impact. So you define a level of impact for each of them, and then you try to combine them together to have an overall impact level for that risk. You can go really far in the assessment part. At the end, what you need to understand is most of the time these scales, they are only there to help you identify whether you want to treat that risk or not, and whether for your project it's more important to treat risk A or risk C. So it's not a question of absolute figures, it's all relative. So my 1 to 4 scale, it's just a question of, among my projects, I have identified 25 risks. Among these 25 risks, that one has a huge impact, and that one is the only one that has the biggest impact out of all the risks of the project. So that one will be 4. These others, they have a huge, a sort of big impact, but it's less than that risk. So they will be 3. And so on and so on. And same for probability. It's not a question of absolute value. We all agree that it's 75%. It's just a question of that risk is more probable or likely to happen than this other risk. So at the end, what you want to be able to do is to place your risks in such a matrix with risks that are low impact, low probability would go there. The ones that have high impact, high probability would go up there. And then try to identify some places or cells in the matrix where you say the ones that are there that are red are unacceptable. We cannot leave on that project with these risks without doing anything. And the ones that are minor, well, you live with them and that's it. You know they are there and that's it. Yeah, you can have that same kind of matrix, but then with percentages and more cells. But it's always the same. You need to identify the cells where you say this is acceptable and the ones that are not acceptable. So this brings us to another notion, which is the risk appetite. So it might be something that you are not aware of, that you cannot measure, but in some organization it's pretty clear. The risk appetite, it's the ability or the willingness of that organization to accept risks or not. There are some organizations that are more risky or risk-oriented than others. A bank is less risk-oriented than Google, because there are some domains where you have to take risks to stay alive, and there are some domains where you do not have to take risks so that your reputation is still there. So banking industry specifically, you have to be low risk oriented. So your risk appetite would be low. That means the line where you say all the risk above that line I don't want to take without any action, mitigation action, that line in banking industry would be quite low. Whereas in some other industries, it's in the middle, and in some other industries, it's quite high. If I don't take the risks, I know that in 2 years I'm not there anymore because I have not invested, innovated enough, and I'm gone because all my clients would go to that other company. So there's that notion at the level of your domain, so really that industry that is more risky or not, but also at the level of that particular organization. So maybe in banking, there are some banks that are more innovative and risky than other banks because they don't have the same profile. I imagine banks that are doing just private banking in Luxembourg, they have to be really well established and confidence that they will not play with the money of their clients. And some other banks might be more innovative. So at the level of that organization, there might be a risk profile, a risk appetite that is different from the industry. And of course, at the level of one project, you might also have some appetite that is different. If we look at developing a new product that will be tomorrow's biggest product of the company, then that project is really strategic. It's really important, and we are willing to put a certain amount of innovation and risk, and to accept that we will not master everything, that we cannot control everything. On some other projects, the project is not performing if you're not sure that the cost will be there, the timing will be there, and you have to control everything. So again, it can be different from one project to the other. So if on a project you can be aware of the amount of risk you are allowed to take, of the level of that line, where that line is placed. And so when you manage the project, at one point you need to talk to your steering committee because you have identified one risk that is there. Is that something, is the line here and I need to talk about that risk, or is the line there and they don't care? It's up to me to manage that risk, and they don't need to have some reporting about that. So being able to identify that appetite and the level when I need to focus on the risk, and the level when I can drop them or not consider them. It's if you can do that, it's always you spend less time working on some risks that are not important, or you do report whenever it's necessary. Okay, so when you've done the assessment part of your risk management activity, what you have at the end is a list of risks that are placed on a matrix, or that you have ranked in a way. And so from that list you can identify the ones that are acceptable, that you will not do anything about, and you will have a list of unacceptable risks that you consider, and your steering committee considers that you have to do something about them. So by the end of that activity, your risk register, so your list of risk is also completed. So you have done that part, so defining the probability, defining the impact, and defining that yes, you want to do something about that risk. And that said, you can have that risk matrix also available. So there is a document, what is it called exactly, the document you provided me with?
Yeah, it's within the core guidelines. It's within the core guidelines. We have a risk assessment table.
Yeah, so within that document, what is defined is that you are going to use, you are really close to what I recommend. So you call it likelihood instead of probability, but it's really the same impact. So these are the two measures that you want to have. And then you measure them with high, medium, low scales. And so just you have a list of risks and you define both criteria for these. Okay, this was for the assessment piece. Let's take a break, 10 minutes, and then we'll talk about mitigation. So mitigation is all about trying to reduce the exposure, even if it's not computed and measured precisely. The goal is really to limit the exposure of the project towards risks. So trying to find the acceptable level of risk that you can take on the project. So there are 5 types of responses you can have. So actions you can take, kind of actions you can take. There are some actions, and it's not really important to understand for one action to which category it's related. There's no point discussing whether that one is more prevention, that one is more reduction. You don't care. These categories are more there for you to understand. If I'm thinking about reducing the risk, what could I do? If I'm thinking about preventing the risk from happening at all, what could I do? So it's more in that sense that you can use these categories. But at the end, putting the action into the right box, it's not that important. So the kind of actions you can take. Prevention. So it's really reducing the probability of the risk happening to 0. So doing something that will make you sure that that risk will not happen anymore. If you decide to move from Kirchberg to, I don't know, Saarbrücken, the risk of planes crashing on the building will be next to 0, I imagine. Maybe in Saarbrücken you don't have any airports. Or, for example, here, not using that new technology we wanted to try on that particular project, because there is a risk that, trying to understand that new technology will be more costly, will take us some more time on the project. So we decide we are not going to take that risk. So we are going to stick to the old technology. It's not that important to achieve the results of the project. We wanted to do it, we wanted to play with it, but we've measured the risk. It's too big. We decide to prevent the risk totally by using the old technology. You can have some reduction actions. In that case, what you try to do is reduce either or both the impact and the probability of occurrence of the risk. So most of the time the actions that you can find are reduction actions. So, for example, if there is somebody in your team who is not happy, is not been happy for many months now, and is looking for a job out somewhere else, then if you forced to have a backup working with that person, or if you force that person to have a clear documentation of whatever is doing, then maybe it's a way to reduce the risk of being left with no documentation and no idea of what that person was doing if he leaves. One that is quite nice is the acceptance. So one action I can do is say, yes, I accept the risk. But it's really one thing that is not that it's not that funny to say, oh yeah, we accept the risk and that's it. One thing is that you are aware of that risk. you have communicated about that risk, and you have decided as a steering committee or as whatever authority, you have decided that you accept the fact that that risk is there. It's really different from not knowing anything at all about that risk and not knowing its impact and not knowing the probability of it happening. So accepting it. And in some cases, it's just because the risk is low, is not that important, so you accept it. Or you can't do anything about it. That plane crashing, yeah, you can move, but if you are stick to that, you have to stay in that building, you have no choice. There's nothing you can do about it. So you just accept that fact. Yeah, for example, if you're working on a project and you're waiting for a new law to be passed, and you are expecting the details of that new law to actually do some parts of your project. If the law is late, your project is late. There's nothing you can do about it. You're not going to go bang on the door of the whoever is writing that law or passing that law. In some cases, you have to accept that. Other actions you can do. So you see, with these first actions, it's more oriented to preventive actions, so trying to reduce the risk. Then you have some contingency actions, so post-risk occurrence actions. So the risk has been identified, it's there, it's happening. What can you do? Contingency actions are there so that you've thought about what you could do before the risk is actually occurring. So you you have thought about, okay, if that person is leaving, what we'll do is we'll define a team of 2 people who will take over that role, because one has followed the work. So with my reduction action, one has followed the work of that person and they had a regular meeting. And the other one has these competencies, so put together they might be able to do a good job. So this is what we're going to do if that risk occurs. If you have emergency plans in a building, it's typical contingency action. If there is a fire, this is what you have to do. If you have some people who are assigned as security people in the building who would guide people in case of fire, who would help them go to the right exit. If you have trained these people, if you have assigned these people, if you have given them some instructions and so on, this is contingency action. The risk is the fire in the building and having people hurt and trapped in the building in fire. And your action is, if the fire occurs, then these people will lead everybody outside. Of course, doing some backups and being able to restore your data is also part of the contingency. Transfer is a special way of reducing the risks, is saying, if the risk is there and if there are some impacts, I'm not going to get the impacts directly. My company is not going to have to support these impacts. I will transfer these to somebody else. Typically, having an insurance on my car, so I drive to Brussels, I decide that I need to get to that meeting in time to sign the contract with my client. I don't care, my car is insured. If I hurt some people, I am insured. The consequences will be taken care of by my insurances. So I transfer the risk, the impact of the risk will be taken care of by somebody else. So having some insurances on some parts, or having some specific clauses in contracts, having some fixed term contracts. So contracts where you say to your supplier, if you are late, if you are not delivering what we have agreed, it's your fault, you're going to pay us indemnities or whatever, then your project is not supporting the entire problem that is coming with that risk. At the end, it's not it will not solve all your problems. It's not because your supplier was supposed to deliver one part that you had to integrate to build your final solution. If they are late, you're late and your project is late and your final solution will be delivered late. So, okay, you have received some money from that supplier because they have some, late interests or whatever. But okay, it doesn't fix the problem that you might have more money in the project budget, but you're still late on the project. In the case of that new technology we wanted to test, you can transfer by having a proof of concept or having another small project, test that technology, and maybe delay that second big project, wait for that proof of concept to use that technology once you are more trained and used to it. So that's one kind of transfer also.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Do you think that there are one is better to use than other on these 5 types of response? One is better than the other, or just
No.
that's include different kind? And
Yeah, anything is good as long as it works.
okay.
And you have to.
So it depends of the risk. We have to take in mind,
Yeah.
in mind this kind of
So
response, and then
this is more like a checklist. If you have a risk, you say that risk is big. It's high up on my matrix. I need to do something about it. Then you consider: is there a way I can prevent that risk at all? Is there a way I can reduce its probability or reduce its impact? Is there a way I can do some contingency action? So when the risk is there, can I prepare something in advance so that I will be able to manage the risk more
so
easily?
even more is a way to mix. So the best thing is to mix the 5 response. If it's possible.
No, because at the end you still want to consider how much will that cost if the risk occurs and it's there and I have to live with the consequences.
Okay.
Maybe some time on my project, maybe some money on my project. How much will it cost if I want to implement that prevention action, plus that reduction action, plus that contingency action, plus that insurance? It costs.
Everything is okay.
So it's just, at first it's a question of looking at the list and considering, can I do something in that direction? And most of the time on your risk, you don't have 5 answers. You don't have 5 types of actions you can do. But if you have several of them, then you can consider which one is the most cost effective. Considering at the end it's always the risk and its consequences against the actions I do to mitigate them. So you need to check what are the actions that I could do, and then using that checklist and imagine which is the ones that is the most efficient and how much money do I want to spend. Okay, so there are different strategies. So again, another way of looking at what type of actions you could do. If it's about risk, is linked to uncertainty. So if you have areas where you are not sure about how it's going to happen, then you invest in information, meaning you get information, you buy information, you buy expertise, you get some consulting. So you try to find the information so that you can reduce the amount of uncertainty, and then the risk will be reduced. So it's one way of looking at some actions you could do. If we don't know about that new law, it's not out there, but we know it's going to be out there and we'll have to work on it. One way would be to maybe try to find some people who are working on the text of the law and they are willing to share that information. It's not finalized yet, but if you have maybe a first version of that document, it would be easier to prepare for the rest. So finding information. So prevention is really looking at the cause of the risk and trying to find a solution to remove that cause. There are many different ways of doing that. So trying to find where you can, on which item you can play, so that the risk will not happen. You can have some controls, some checks, some testing, some measurements, some reviews, some whatever you call them, so that at some points during the project you verify that you are on the right track, and you make sure that you handle the inconsistencies that you find. So all the controlling that you can do, that at the end you understand more clearly what is the current situation, how that situation is different from what you are supposed to do, so from your project's objective, and so trying to find identify the gap between the current situation and the desired situation, and so managing that difference and trying to bridge that gap. We've talked about backups or protection plans. So anything that can be put in place so that what is at risk is protected can be a good thing to do. So, for example, if you're not really sure that your supplier will last the entire project and that they are really able to deliver, I don't know, you need 10 or 100 pieces of equipment, you're not sure they are able to deliver all these equipments. So maybe find a second supplier that you could easily, you've started already discussing with that second supplier, maybe have a contract that you can action only if the first supplier is not working well. That's one solution. So we talked about that sharing, transferring, so trying to identify who could be able to support the risk with you instead of you alone. And then, so insurance, anytime you can have some insurance, or provisioning, so having a certain amount of money ready or time ready for things that you had not planned. That's a good way of handling risks. So it might not be that for each specific risk you are going to have that small amount of money ready or that amount of time ready if something bad happens. It's just overall on your project you have some buffers on the budget and buffers on the timing, so that at some point of time you can use that buffer to whatever risk is happening. So yeah, what is the principles about the mitigation phase? You try to identify the different mitigation actions. For each of them you try to assess whether to which extent it is going to reduce the impact, it is going to reduce the probability. So what will be the efficiency and the effectiveness of that action? You select the actions that you actually want to implement. So maybe all the good ideas you had, you select just a few of them. Because at the end, if you sum up all the cost of all the actions, you will spend more time doing risk management than actually doing actions on or work on the project. Once you have decided which actions you want to implement, you actually do them. You check whether they are working. I'm going too quick. Once you have decided for each risk, you check whether all your actions are going in the same direction. You cannot say, okay, for that guy that is not, that might be quitting, I'm assigning Mr. X as a backup. And then for some other risk, I'm assigning Mr. X to do something else, and Mr. X is having these many things to do. So that's not possible. So check the overall consistency of your action plan. So define some days, define some responsible persons, and so on. So it might be that, and it's a good thing for each risk to have one person assigned to the risk. It might be the project manager, most of the time it's okay. And then for actions, you can have somebody else. So overall, the project manager or that person assigned to that risk will know what is the status of the risk, and will go back to, maybe you have 2 actions and there is 1 person responsible for each action, mitigation action. And then the person responsible for that risk will coordinate with these 2 people. It really depends on the type of actions and who is the best person to actually implement the action. And so, of course, risk management is part of project management. So all these activities that you want to do about risk management, they have to go somewhere into your project plan, into your project budget, and so on. So you need to think about risk management a little bit, focusing and forgetting the rest, but then integrate whatever you have decided for risk management. You need to integrate that back in your project planning, in everything on a project. Okay, so as we said, at the end, the actions, there's always this question of do I want to invest that much effort, money, time in these actions if I know that they are not going to be sufficient enough to reduce the risk, or they are going to cost more than whatever we are going to pay if that risk occurs. So assess the cost, evaluate the reduction that you expect from that action, and define whether it's sufficient or not. And for some of actions, if you are able to define some metrics, to define some measurements that will show you clearly that action is working and that it's reducing whatever risk there is, then it's always better to be able later on to justify that we had that risk, we put in place that action, it cost that much of money, but then the risk impact or probability has been reduced by that amount. In some cases you can do that. In some other cases, most of the time it's quite difficult to measure all these. But for risk management, there's always, you remember that slide about the critics against risk management, there's always this question of, do we need to do all these for just potential things where we have all that work to do on the actual work on the project? So risk management, it will always come back to justifying making sure that you're not spending these much time and money on something that is not even there. So mitigation plan, nothing really. It's a plan where you define your actions, you define the dates and so on. In practice, so remember that Excel sheet with the list of risks. So for each risk, you have a second table where you can have, so there's the idea of the risk, and then you have one or several actions. So definition of the action, type of action if you want. If you're not able to define whether it's prevention, reduction, or whatever, it's not that important. Who is responsible for that action? That's the action, description in detail. When it's going to be implemented, what is the effect I expect to get when that action is implemented, the status, and some remarks. So basically, a simple sheet to follow up on the action plan. In your context, in that same document we've seen earlier, you've got the second part of the table with the mitigation or contingency actions, where you just define the action and what you expect from that action. At the stage of the project proposal, it's enough, because you're not going to put some dates or put some people responsible for the action. Whenever you actually start the project, then you need to take that table and check, put more in your action plan, so it's really a plan with dates and responsibilities. That's another example. So I don't know if you all know that document, but it can give you a few examples of the kind of of risk you might have in a project. For example, delays in the delivery of the results of the project, or a research effort that is too ambitious, or the delay in hiring a PhD, for example. So in your context, I think some of the risks are quite regular and typical to research projects and to the domains where you work in. So it's quite a good thing to maybe spend some time, and it might be one exercise that you want to do as a group after this training, is try to think about all the risks you had in past projects, all the things that went bad in past projects, and try to find a checklist of typical risks that you have in your context. It's really one thing that is not lost, and that you could easily reuse in the next projects. Okay, so next step about monitoring. So what we've discussed this far, it's at the project proposal, at the project start, but most of it is just thinking and imagine what kind of actions we could do and this and that. During the project, mostly what you do is monitor everything. So what you have is your action plan, you've got your list of risks, some are acceptable, some are not acceptable, so you need to do something about them. You might have defined some metrics that you want to follow. And with the monitoring, you want to have an updated list of risks, an updated action plan. So it's all a question of understanding what you've done, was it efficient, do you need to do more, do you need to do less, are there some new risks, the risks that were already there, have they evolved? So what you want to do is actually implementing the action plan, monitoring the actions, reassessing the risk, identifying new risks, and capitalization, even if it's most of the time you don't do it. And if you do it at the end of the project. But it's a good practice to try to do it along the way during the project. So anytime you can say, okay, we have put an action in place, it's not working, let's drop it, and just put somewhere in a place where other people can look at, or I will know to look at later on that this action is not working for that type of risk, for example. So in practice, when you're doing project management, whenever you do some reporting, when you are doing some steering committees regularly on the project, just put your risk management hat and imagine look at the project this way. Then, of course, whenever there is a new event that might have an impact on the project, I don't know, you need to work with a new partner, stop 5 minutes. Is there a risk related to that relationship? And then you might add new risk in your project list of risks. Who is doing the monitoring? Who is doing the risk management in general? Project manager, for sure. Your project sponsor, if you have one. That's another subject, but you should. If your project does not have a sponsor, then that's one risk that you can add in your list. The project is not sponsored enough, we don't have support, it will not go anywhere. In some cases, you might appoint a risk manager to the project, if it's quite risky, I would assume. Or you have somebody in the organization with a risk manager role that would help you, do the risk management. So coming to the project and looking at it with the risk manager review. And as we said, you need to assign one responsible for each risk. It might be the project manager for every risk in the project. It might be for some risks, the project manager is not really competent to understand whether that risk is there or not, or might not be the best person to monitor the risk. So assign somebody else in that case. So what I have not said. So it's a cycle. It's always going back to the same actions, updating the list. You might remove the risks that are closed or just mark them as closed and not come back to them anymore. Of course, you need to look out for the events that you that are going to have consequences, bad consequences of a project, and refine the information on risks. Yeah, so during the course of the project, the probability and impact of a risk can change. And so a risk that was considered acceptable and you have not treated might be suddenly with a higher probability, higher impact. So then you need to do something about it, or the other way around. We've talked about that. Yeah, so naming a risk manager who is different. If you have the resources to do that, why not? At the end, if you have a project manager, that's one good thing. If sometimes the project manager does think about risk management instead of thinking about all the details that he has to coordinate and everything, it's a good thing. If you spend a fair amount of time thinking about risk at the project proposal, a fair amount of time thinking about risk when a project starts, and sometimes during the project, you're not that bad, I would say, in your practice. So we've talked at the beginning, we've talked about the risk budget. So you could have two parts in that risk budget. One part that is really identified for all the actions that you have defined. And so you've said, that action is going to cost that amount of money. So you have part of your project budget, which is identified as a risk budget for these actions. And you could have also, as we talked, a provision for risks. So it's one part that it's just that buffer, money-wise, let's say, that you have. It's not specific for one risk or one action because you don't know yet what could happen. But you are pretty sure that something will happen, that you would need to take money from that provision. During the course of the project, if you have defined some provisions and some budget for your mitigation actions, of course you need to monitor these budgets. So define the initial budget, compare it to the actual costs and see what is remaining, so that if there is a new risk coming and you've identified a new mitigation action, you know whether you can take from that action budget to mitigate that risk, or whether you can take from the provision that was there but not defined precisely. Or if you don't have any money left for risks, and then you need to ask somebody, whether the authority, to give you extra budget to treat that risk, if it's that important. Yeah, so if you want to work with exposure, then you should compare your total project exposure to risk in money compared to the remaining budget that you have, and so it should be lower than the remaining budget you have for risks. Otherwise, you are not able to cover all the potential cost of the risks that you have identified. If you had put in place some indicators to follow up on different situations, you can follow also these indicators. So I've just thought about the total exposure of the project. Yes. You can, if you want to give some figures about risk management, you can always report on the number of risks, on the number of closed risk, on the cost of the actions, on the cost of the actions versus cost of the project. Okay, we spent some time on risk management, but comparing just our few mitigation actions to the total cost of the project, this is only 5%, so it's okay. Giving some figures and facts is always a good way of justifying. If you have some figures about the efficiency of the action plan, and for each risk, having the single exposure to risk, efficiency and cost of the mitigation action, if you can measure all these. Okay. Last step is about capitalization. So this is the last step, but it could come or be organized at any point of time during the project. It's really whatever you've done about risk management during that project, you should use that information and share that information so that you or other people in your organization gain a better way of doing risk management on future projects, on other activities. So that is the idea. So what's the goal? It's really benefiting from the experience you had on the project, feeding back knowledge to the entire organization about risk management, trying to avoid that these risks would happen on other projects, in other cases. For example, if you had a bad situation with a supplier, so your list of future risks might not be coming only from risks in your project. It might come from problems that you actually had on your project. You had not envisioned at all that you would have a problem with that supplier, but it happened. So you should feed that to the risk list or whatever, knowledge base, so that you need to pay attention to the supplier timing or whatever. So what you want to do there is really improve the knowledge on potential risks. So at the end, you make better decisions on whether that risk is that important, whether that action is that efficient, and make better decisions. And then improving reactivity and improving overall the efficiency of your mitigation actions. In practice, if you want to do that on your own and you're the only one in your organization, it's not that easy. If you are helped by a PMO or by a central organization of any sort that will help you gather a few information on risk management and the risks that have happened or the risks that have not happened and the action that you have implemented and how great they were. Any kind of information you can share is good. If you have a central entity that will help you define what kind of information they expect from you, and then put in place a communication means so that you know what kind of report you need to produce, or is there a knowledge base or whatever, a wiki or whatever place where you can share that information. Then you need to assign people to collect that information and try to categorize. So once you have collected from that project, a second step, we're talking good maturity in project and risk management here. But if you want to go really the full stuff, then at some point you have collected all this information and you are going to categorize that so that anytime a new project starts, they would know, okay, we are so close to that other project that we can use this risk from that category. And we are also close from that other project because we are working with the same partners, so we could also pick from that other project. So any kind of type of project, type of business, type of risk, kind of information, so that you can easier later on get information. Then record that information, share it, and if you have some PMO quality organization entity that is there to help you with that, it's easier. If not, if you're on your own, you can still do the exercise for you, for your next project proposal. You'll be able to not do the same mistakes, or you will think about that particular risk, or you will know that this kind of mitigation action is not working that well, so you will know that you need to find another way of doing it. Yeah, so overall, the implementation of risk management on projects, you need to have some resources. So a risk manager, project manager most of the time, somebody responsible for each risk, and somebody responsible for the actions. If you want to put in place risk management, you will have to have some budget to do it. Some authorization to either spend some money or some time, or both, on these activities. And so, as we said, that budget could be an actual action budget with specific lines for each action, or more a provision that you have on your budget. So your budget not being only your estimation and that's it, but that little extra box that will help you take care of your risks and incidents later on. You can have a tool to manage risks, but as I said, it's not a question of tool. There are some project management tools, and in most of them you have a part where you can list your risk, you can assign the responsibilities, some to-do lists and actions. So if it's there, if you already have the tool, yeah, why not? But don't buy a tool specifically for that. For research projects, as far as I know, research projects, there's no need to have fancy tools. Yeah, if you are working in some specific industries where you have to do some simulations and you have to have exact figures on the estimation of the impact and so on, yeah, maybe, but in the context of a research project, I don't think. So at the end, as you've understood, the workload necessary on risk management. So it's really at the beginning when you define the project, when you launch it, and then it decreases along the project. So by the end of the project, less risk, less risk management, and a little bit normally. A little bit more by the end of the project at the closure, so that you have some capitalization. Okay, so if you really want to implement risk management, what are the challenges? As we said, the culture toward risks is one item that you cannot easily change. So if you are in an organization where managers, top managers, nobody wants to talk about risk because it's not happening yet. Tell me, come back to me when it's happening. That is not that easy, and they will not agree on an extra specific budget for risk management. There's no way. So it's not that easy. So having a feeling of how your organization reacts to risk management, I think you have the chance or maybe not if you don't want to hear about risk, but with research projects you have to give you report to some funding organizations, so you have to do some sort of risk management. So you cannot just say at SnT we don't care about risk management. I think you cannot. So you have to think about it. If we think about identification, that phase, what's important is to have the right resources and to open your mind and look at the different categories and all the different checklists. So knowledge base and having the right people on board. And one thing I haven't said earlier is having several people with different mindsets about the project. So technology, partnership, whatever, so that these people will have, if we focus them on what are the risks, they would have different views. So do not stay on your own and try to imagine all the different subjects. It will be better if you have more people with different views. For monitoring oops. Wait, oops. I don't know what is behind there, reviews. For monitoring, you need to have something regular. So at some point, you need to force the project to think about risks. That's the main challenge. And for capitalization, if you don't have somebody forcing you to do it, the chances you are not going to do it. So impose capitalization as an organization, and then try to structure and give some way to share that information. If it stays in your heads, then it's good for you, but it will not be shared with others. If it stays in a report that is in a folder that is only accessible to the people who were working on that project, forget it, you will not share that information with others. So you need to find a way to share. And that's the challenge about that. And that was the last slide. Do you have any questions, any remarks, any... Yeah.
So one simple means, you just said it's information being in the head. I think that's the best place where it is, in somebody's head.
Mm-hmm.
One simple thing I was missing at the end of the project was a simple debriefing.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, get together and discuss it, and even make it maybe public.
Yeah.
So you sit together and discuss what the hell went wrong, what was good, so
Yeah.
it comes into the heads of people. I've seen it in software engineering. The problem with software engineering is it's never well documented, never ever. And then the information has to be in the people's head about architecture,
Yeah.
what design decisions about, and same. I guess the same might be true for risk.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, capitalization phase, it's not, I'm telling you about risk management, but it's the same for all the other topics on the project. Just having one hour meeting with the team and trying to understand what went right and what you would do exactly the same the next project, or what you would do absolutely not the same the next project. It's really one good way to start. If you cannot do it with the team, do it with yourself. If you can do it better with another broader audience, then it's shared with more people, and then they will think about it in their next projects. Other remarks, comments? No? Okay, so thank you for your attention. If you can spend 2 or 3 minutes just filling out the evaluation form so that we get better next time. Thank you.